Hi, this is Kevin Deal. Today we're going to talk about the PrimaLuna Evolution 200 integrated amplifier. I'm so excited to talk about this integrated amp. This replaces the PrimaLuna Prologue Premium, one of the largest selling, in fact, I would almost wager to say the biggest selling integrated amplifier in the history of hi-fi. And why would that be? Well, I think I can look at a review that was done by 𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗺 in STEREONET Magazine. He reviewed it way back in 2012, and he said something that I thought was really terrific. He said this: ever since I reviewed PrimaLuna's Prologue Premium for the June 2012 issue, it has been the model I turned to when I wanted a moderately priced integrated amplifier to try with a new speaker. It never disappointed me and never seemed outclassed. Even when the speaker was the Martin Logan Montes, which is $10,000 a pair. At $23.99, the Prologue Premium to me represents the sweet spot for systems in the range of $4,000 to $10,000 or even higher. Robert kept that amp as his reference for many, many, many years. And that's a big deal because, first of all, I have a huge amount of respect for 𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗺. He's not a part-time reviewer. He is a mainline reviewer at STEREONET Magazine. He is very experienced. He could call any manufacturer and say, hey, I'd like to use one of your amps, and by the way, I'm going to mention it in a whole bunch of speaker reviews, and they would be all over themselves to send it to him. But after he reviewed the Prologue Premium and it earned a Stereophile Class A rating, which means the best without regard to cost, he kept it there and enjoyed it for many, many years. So what happened? PrimaLuna looked at the Prologue Premium, which was so perfect, but they found a few things that they could fine-tune. Power supply, well, first of all, let's talk about the pricing. They didn't raise the price of this amp for about almost 10 years. It should have gone up over 18% just to keep track with inflation. But PrimaLuna is on the side of the consumer. Herman van den Dungen is on the side of the consumer and controlled cost, absorbed the price increases year after year after year because this is a cause to him and to me. So many products today are not built based on what they cost to manufacture. They are priced on what a manufacturer can get away with. And PrimaLuna is not like that. So the product went up just a little bit more than the cost of inflation, but has a lot of terrific improvements. It now has an all-tube headphone amp built into it. It now has improvements in the power supply and the DC filament supply. It now has a tape monitor out. And, just little things that needed to be tweaked. But if you have a Prologue Premium, you don't need to worry for one moment because your product is still relevant and your product is something that will be relevant 20 years from now. That's always the way that it's been with PrimaLuna. So what do we have here? It's an integrated amplifier. It runs 4 EL34s, but you can put any tubes you want into it for a couple of reasons. One of them is adaptive auto bias. And you need to go to the PrimaLuna website and learn deeply about that because bias is super important. So many amplifiers that say they have auto bias are not auto bias. They're not honest. They are technically something called self-bias or cathode bias. And that by definition means that they are running in Class A, and that means that you're going to get a shorter tube life. PrimaLuna runs their tubes at the lowest voltages and the easiest bias that they can without going into crossover distortion. There's no reason to run the bejesus out of tubes. I looked at a competitor's amp that's about 100 watts per channel out of a pair of tubes, and they're running 585 volts to the plates. That amp was blazing. And they won't even tell you it's 585 volts. They'll say that it's a trade secret. It's not a trade secret. Manufacturers should be open about that because you need to know. It's like EPA mileage on a car. You don't want a gas hog, and you don't want an amplifier that's a tube hog. PrimaLuna will tell you 417 volts. All of the amps, 417 volts. And because they run the amps so easy, they can run EL34s. And if any tube head is honest with you, People that know what they're talking about, you ask them, what's the most musical tube ever made? They'll say it's the EL34. EL34s are glorious. They might also say that EL34s don't have good bass response. That is not true because bass response is not determined by the tube. Bass response is determined by the output transformers in the tube amp. That's the beginning and the end of the performance of a tube amplifier. Almost every manufacturer on the planet buys their output transformers off the shelf, and they are the most expensive part of an amp. So you look at a competitive amp that sells for $8,000, right? That amp weighs 36.5 pounds. This weighs 47.5 pounds, and the output transformers are designed and wound in-house by the best engineers in the world. Same thing with the power transformer. Power transformers are expensive, and toroidal power transformers cost 5 times more than a regular C core or EI core transformer. I mean, toroidal transformers are the gold standard, but manufacturers don't want to use them because they take a lot more material to manufacture, so that means more cost. Plus, they cannot be manufactured in the same way. They have to be made one at a time. But PrimaLuna uses toroidal power transformers in every product that they make. But not only that, this power transformer is sealed in a non-microphonic resin to protect it because it's an expensive part. And then it's placed into a mu-metal can. Mu-metal is a magic metal because it keeps the stuff. The benefit of a toroidal transformer is they don't radiate outside of the core of the donut. So they're much quieter for the front end of the amp. But when you put them into a mu-metal shield, you're guaranteeing that nothing is leaking out of there. It costs a lot of money to do that, but that's what PrimaLuna is about. And true to PrimaLuna, this amplifier is made with point-to-point wiring throughout the signal path. You don't want to mount, I want to show you a picture of a tube that's mounted to a printed circuit board. What's wrong with that? Because when you change tubes, that socket wiggles, and if it's really hot because a power tube is plugged into it, there's a chance that you're going to crack that PCB because we've made repairs on those products here in the service department. You have to put jumpers, kind of a Band-Aid, across the broken traces. And then more traces break, and then you end up with something that ends up on eBay or at a yard sale. Not so with PrimaLuna. PrimaLuna looked at products that were made way back in the 50s and 60s that are still collectible today. Products like Marantz tube amplifiers. Those amps still work today because they are made the same way PrimaLunas are made, with point-to-point wiring. Now let's talk about this tube thing. A lot of companies would love to use EL34s, but they can't because they run the voltages too high. PrimaLuna allows you to run any tube you want because, number one, we're running them really super easy. Number two, because of adaptive auto bias. Adaptive auto bias was invented by PrimaLuna back in 2003. It has been refined and improved after over all of these years, and the beauty of it is this. You never have to get out a multimeter. You don't have to worry about tubes not being matched. You know, some amplifiers are only going to have one bias adjustment to control 4 tubes. What's wrong with that? Well, if one of these tubes fail, you can't replace just one because it has to be matched to the other 3, so you have to replace all 4. Or maybe you have to replace a pair of them. That's not the way it is in a PrimaLuna. In fact, in this amplifier, I could run 4 different tubes at once. I could run an EL34, a KT88, a KT120, and a KT150. Adaptive auto bias is so powerful and so well designed, it'll make all those tubes play nicely in the sandbox together. But the other thing is they cut distortion, and that's the secret sauce to a PrimaLuna amp. That's why everybody loves them. Adaptive auto bias cuts distortion. It increases the usable life of tubes because when tubes get old, they don't age equally. It's just the way that it is. So when this tube gets a little droopy, adaptive auto bias is going to recognize that and work as hard as it can to make sure that you don't hear that degradation. The other thing is keeping the amp out of the shop. On some amps, if a tube fails, and the tube's going to fail, it'll take out a fuse. But there are some amps on the market that don't believe in fuses. I have no idea why, but it's true. And so if a tube shorts, they're going to have sacrificial resistors. You got to turn the amp upside down or take it to a shop and send it off somewhere where they replace a cathode or a plate resistor or a screen resistor, whatever needs to be done. That's not the way it is in a PrimaLuna. If one of these tubes fail, instantly a relay opens up on the adaptive auto bias board, instantly cutting off the voltages to the tubes. That protects all the parts inside. A little red LED lights up in front of the bad tube. You simply turn off the amp, plug in another tube, and it doesn't even have to be the right tube. Turn the amp on and you're ready to rock. How cool is that? No adjustments, no muss, no fuss, and because the tubes are running really cool, you don't have to wince every time you turn the amp on. And I've been doing this for a long time. And I have owned amps where every time I turned them on, I was worried about what was going to happen. And that's not the way it is with a PrimaLuna. It uses 12 AU7s in the front end, and I'm going to tell you why they did that. There's more flavors of 12 AU7 tubes being made today than any other part. And there's a reason for that. 12 AU7s are a glorious sounding tube. So if you want to make this amp have a little bit sharper presentation on top, pull out the stock tubes, put in some Russian reissue 12 AU7s, you can get just a little bit more bite on top. Or if you want to have some fun, get into vintage tubes. We have a video that discusses and will educate you that on the PrimaLuna website, and it'll break it all down. But the cool thing is there's more choices in 12 AU7s than any other part. And it's for a reason, because it is a glorious sounding tube. Let's get back to the way this amp is built and looking at the tube sockets here. These are ceramic tube sockets, and I want you to look how it's done. There are panels for each EL34 held in place with bolts for each tube. That means it's a fully ventilated socket. It means that you don't have to worry about any stress on printed circuit boards, and it's built to last a lifetime. Up in the front, we have an 𝗵𝗶 blue velvet potentiometer. Other products are going to use chips, and I'm going to say this. There are electronic volume controls. I'm not going to poo-poo all of them because there's a few companies that do a pretty good job. But what's shocking is some of the biggest companies that have the biggest reputations don't do a good job. And they're going to be using chips that cost $2.50 each. What's cool about that? What's high-end about that? This potentiometer costs about $50, but there's a reason for it, because it tracks well, because it lasts a long time, and because it sounds like analog. It doesn't sound like a chip. Up in the front here is a controller board, and this controller board controls these relays in the back. Now, PrimaLuna is not alone on using relays, but there's some companies that use selector switches. And I want you to think about this. Think about your dad's TV set, and that he used to have to go get a can of tuner cleaner because it wouldn't stay on that channel, and because channel 7 would bleed over to channel 5. And he had to do all kinds of stuff to clean that up. Selector switches are not your friend because they degrade with time, number one. Number two, they don't turn off the other inputs completely. There's always bleed over. Now, let's be real about this. You can't eliminate bleed over completely because things float through in the air, literally. People in San Francisco and New York, they'll actually pick up radio stations through unshorted inputs in their amps. But we're trying to reduce noise to the degree we can. So what PrimaLuna did is they use Japanese relays made by Takamatsuwa. That's a division of Fujitsu. And those relays are guaranteed for 50,000 openings and closings. So when you select auxiliary 1 as an example, that relay closes. It gives you the best contact possible and a signal path that's about that long. That long. All the other relays are left open, so the benefit is there's no way for a signal to leak through except through the air. Now they did something else that's really cool. You're going to see that there's a couple of little resistors in there because they present a perfect 100,000 ohm impedance to your source components. And there are some components that are going to sound better because of it. Now, what does it cost PrimaLuna to do that? Maybe $1 an input to add those parts. But other manufacturers have got this fine-tuned not to the nearest dollar, to the nearest penny. I've not seen another company do what PrimaLuna has done. There's also a little shield right in front of the relays. So they've done that, again, to protect it from the possibility of any noise getting into these sensitive inputs. Now, you're going to see on the sides there's a couple more relays. That's because of this. This is not just one of the best integrated amps on the market. This is one of the best tube headphone amps on the market. A lot of products that have headphone amps, they achieve it by using just a little op amp. And I got that. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't even know. If you're not a headphone listener, then you're not even going to care. But there are people that buy these amps only to listen to headphones, and I'll tell you why. Because headphones are speakers. They're just little speakers. So the same rules apply. PrimaLuna has the best quality output transformers, so why not take advantage of it? So what they've done is this. There's relays mounted here. When you flip the headphone switch, those relays close and it diverts the sound from the speaker taps to a voltage divider network that drops the power and sends it to the headphone jack. Boom. Now you've got one of the best headphone amps on the planet, all built in for you. And I'm telling you something, it sounds absolutely amazing. You've got a 4-ohm tap and an 8-ohm tap for your loudspeakers. Make sure that you don't use what the speaker says. Keep that in mind. A speaker that says it's an 8-ohm speaker is oftentimes not. You want to use the tap that sounds best. You always want to experiment. We cover that in the owner's manual. Big 𝗃𝗍𝗃 capacitors, big, beautiful, I mean, it exudes quality. Manufacturers don't encourage their customers to look inside for a reason, because they don't want you to see how ugly it is. But when I look at this, I look at something that is really, really, really worth owning. It comes with a beautiful remote control. The new remote is just a little bit sleeker. It's not one of those tchotchke dollar remotes. I mean, it just shocks me on a high-end product that costs $5,000 that they include little plastic remotes. Look at this. It's machined. It has neoprene rings on the ends to protect your components. Speaking of that, I noticed that on all the new Evolution stuff, they are still using rubber feet, but they put a pad on top of the foot to protect your furniture, because rubber can react with different types of finishes. And that's what I mean. The Dutch people, Herman van den Dungen, they think of details all the time for the consumers. And I gotta say one more thing here. I gotta say something to people that are new to tubes. Talk to somebody that knows what's going on, because so many people that are first-time tube amp buyers, they go, oh yeah, but this is only 36 watts. So, I mean, 20 watts is a ton of power. It is a ton of power. They go, no, I need 100 watts. Why do you need 100 watts? I just do, you know. But if you talk to anybody who is a tube head, they are going to tell you that power is the last thing that you think about. In fact, asking for high power out of a pair of tubes can be a gross mistake on your part, because it means short tube life, it means more shorts, it means service problems. No. Don't worry about that. Get something that runs the tubes easy. Get something that you don't have to worry about and you can just run it every day and have fun with it. So I think I've covered about everything in this amp. I mean, look, the ProLog Premium, if you own one, party on. You've got something that is absolutely worth owning and worth keeping. But if you don't have a tube amp, do something like this. It's going to fire your imagination. I would rather have this amp at $29.99 over a stack of solid state. And I mean that. If I had to give up my tube system at home, my listening would drop in half, especially for those people that are streaming. And I want to say one more thing. There's a little box on the bottom of the amp that you will notice. It's an empty box for the optional phono stage. So there is an optional moving magnet phonostage. To install it, it requires soldering. Now for me, I'm still a believer in, if you're into vinyl a lot, I think that the phonostage market is super, super competitive. And I think that there's a lot of great choices. It's the one area of this business where I think people are getting some really, really good deals right now. So I kind of like outboard phonostages if you're into analog a bit. However, if you say, hey man, I want to spin some records, I want something that's a moving magnet phonostage and I don't want to have another box around, then get the optional internal phonostage. That's it. PrimaLuna Evolution 200. Go check it out on the website. I promise you, it's going to be something that'll rock your world. Thanks.